Max Verstappen has responded fiercely to the criticism that's come from Zak Brown regarding the working environment of Red Bull, as the three-time world champion didn't hold back on words when addressing the situation. Obviously, there's been a lot of heat when the boss of McLaren spoke about Red Bull, and while the comments have been usually addressed in an aggressive manner from Horner and Marko, Verstappen has chosen a different and likely much better way to reply to the critics. But with the championship in the drivers category being so close, could we now be looking at a war of words between these two sides in a bid to try and win some battles off the track? It's probably safe to say that Zak Brown isn't the most liked individual on the grid, and his words have more or less been navigated towards something that is not happening in his team. In this case, that is Red Bull. Ever since the Austrian team broke the cost cap, Brown has been on their tails and has gone to the extent of writing a personal letter to Ben Saliam when it comes to a proper penalty being given, something that not even Wolff has done, even though his team was the one suffering the most out of the breach from Red Bull. At that time, McLaren was nowhere to be found in terms of competitiveness at the top, and now that they have the Constructors' Championship in their hands to lose, the pressure is on Norris to deliver as better performance as possible in order to seal the deal in the drivers category as well. Not that long ago, Zak Brown went on to say that Red Bull is a pretty toxic environment for the workers, including the drivers, which was the primary reason as to why senior engineers decided to leave the team for a better working place. Before we go to Verstappen's statement, we need to see what Brown said about Red Bull, as he also refused to hold back on words speaking about the Austrian team's nature, adding, "Red Bull is a pretty toxic environment right now. There is more to come. Newey's departure is an important one because I think a lot of people at Red Bull started working with him. I already mentioned that there were resumes circulating. That happens all the time, but you see a higher level of discomfort. I also think that in the future it will be more difficult with sponsors because they are going to examine carefully what they are associated with. That is a tricky situation." Not only did Brown dare to speak so thoroughly about a rival team, which he has no business doing so, as he has his own challenge to overcome now that McLaren lost so many points with Norris in the Drivers' Championship, but he also went on to comment about the entire Verstappen situation within the team. Obviously, the lack of performance and the statements from Jos and Marko have put the three-time world champion in a position in which we could see him depart Red Bull sooner rather than later. And Brown said that while Red Bull is a great racing team, they are currently destabilized, and that will have a huge implication on where Verstappen will end up if this situation continues in the same way it is right now. And these comments from Brown weren't really accepted very well by the general F1 media, primarily because they've been said at a time when McLaren should have been focused on their own agenda and optimizing the maximum out of their own racing weekends. We've seen blunders in races like Silverstone, Hungary, Canada, Spa, and even Monza, if we are to add the intra-team battle between Piastri and Norris. So with all this to address, Brown decided that it's a good time to speak about his rivals. Maybe it's something of a war game that he's trying to win against Horner and Verstappen, but nevertheless, the three-time world champion is having none of it, as he believes that Brown should be looking at his own team and not spending his energy on what's going on outside of his own camp. When addressing the comments from Zak Brown, Verstappen said, "People always come up with different stuff. I find it really bizarre how they come up with some of these things, but it is what it is. It's part of the game, but I usually just let it go. I've been in F1 for 10 years now, and I'm not wasting time on all those stories. People that say all sorts of stuff should just focus on their own team." That is nothing specifically against Brown, by the way. It applies to everyone. People just need to focus on themselves, and that is what I'm doing as well. The comment makes a lot of sense because in a situation where the Drivers' Championship is so close and we could be looking at one of the greatest comebacks from Norris, who was trailing as much as 78 points during the summer break, Brown decided to spice things up by talking about the other rivals' performance. Furthermore, Verstappen also believes that if McLaren wants to win the championship in the drivers' category, as the constructors are more or less forgotten by the Austrian team due to the fact that they don't have two drivers who are ready to score a high number of points like McLaren McLaren, then they will need a perfect ending to the season. The situation stands as it is. Norris would have to outperform Verstappen by more than 8 points until the end of the season to be crowned as a champion, and that happened only once in 2024 in Australia, where Verstappen didn't even finish the race due to a brake failure. If you are to look at the last 4 races, Norris did win 2 of them, and the momentum is definitely on his side. And to make things even more interesting, McLaren is bringing upgrades to Austin just like Red Bull in order to combat the counterattack from the Austrian team. Andrea Stella has been the more reasonable voice in McLaren, as he even went on to disagree with Brown about the preference of the drivers. The team principal of the Woking-based squad believed from day one that they need to make their priorities straight as soon as they figured out that Norris has an opportunity to compete for the Drivers' Championship. Nevertheless, that is all in the past, and Stella has now emphasised that we should not be looking away from the progress that's been made from his team's side in 2023 and 2024. So if they had to bring upgrades in Austin, primarily revolving around a new floor that they've been holding back for quite some time, it would only be because they've been purely convinced in the performance gains from it. Elaborating further on this matter, Stella said, "In fairness, whether or not we should upgrade the car for the remainder of 2024 was one of my first thoughts after Singapore, because we do have some stuff in the pipeline. Obviously, when you have this kind of performance on track, you always approach things from a cautious point of view in terms of development. At the same time, we need to trust the process. We need to trust the way we've been working so far. I've already said that we have taken our time to make sure that once we deliver trackside, we have done the due diligence. So I don't think this will change our plans." But then again, comments made from Brown are definitely here to destabilize the situation in Red Bull, because he has been in the sport for quite some time now to understand how things work when it comes to a team headed for its downfall sooner rather than later. The departure of 3 key senior engineers is going more in McLaren's favour than we could imagine, because there is a lot of internal pressure now growing in Red Bull that could further destabilise things. Whether we like Brown or not, the situation in Red Bull has really started to derail, as comments from Jos Verstappen and Horner and Marko regarding Verstappen's future in the team and in Formula 1 in general don't speak good news for the Austrian outlet. Obviously, McLaren will try to capitalise on the fact that they have 2 very competitive drivers at the front, but from Austin onwards, Red Bull will utilise the flexibility of the front wing, which is now present in McLaren and Mercedes as well, and whether or not it will bring the amount of performance that Red Bull believes it can, time will tell. As all things stand, the momentum is definitely on McLaren's side, and it's up to us to wait and see whether Red Bull can combat it on their own. So with all this in mind, do you think that Verstappen's comments towards Brown make sense? And do you think that the boss of McLaren should just keep his eyes on his own garden? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, have a look at the video that's appearing on your screen right now.